Ken Langone is here, Mr. I Love Capitalism, and capitalism loves Ken Langone. He's been very generous with his money, and we're trying to get a chunk of it ourselves from him, but we'll work on that.
Stay away.
Yeah. What do you make of what's unfolding tonight?
Well, I hope it ends up the way it looks right now. Because frankly, I think what made us what we are as a nation is capitalism. It lifts all boats. You just had Bernie on. You realize when we started the company, Bernie was 49 years old when we founded Home Depot. Most guys are thinking about quitting. He was just getting going. Wasn't he good? Isn't he unbelievable?
He's very good.
And
neither of you were handy, which is remarkable.
Well, hold it. You know what I said? I got in trouble, but I said he was the first Jew since Jesus to have a hammer in his hand.
Look at you now. Look at both of you now.
Well,
but he made the point that he was very concerned that, if Florida lost its tax haven status that it is for so many people, and Gilliman with some of his ideas to raise taxes there, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, start hiking a variety of taxes, that he would chase people away.
He would turn Florida, as the state, into Venezuela. Just think about what he was proposing. Why anybody in the state of Florida would even contemplate half of what the guy's thinking about, okay? This is nuts. This is irrational. Florida is one of the charming states. People are moving from California to Florida. I have friends that live in California. I'll never leave New York because I'm just a dyed-in-the-wool Yankee, and I love it up here, and I don't mind paying taxes, most of which the money is...
But you tell Marie you have a home in Florida.
I have a home in Florida. I love the sun. But I have a home in Long Island, too. But the fact is, Florida has it all. Why risk any of it? It's a good place to live. The one thing that Florida's got to do that every other state in the union's got to do, public education is disgusting.
But Ken, talk a bit. You're a business guy, and
Yep.
you've worked from nothing and became this incredibly successful person. Talk about policy and whether or not we see policy change. If the Democrats do take control of the House, which doesn't. It's early on. We've got to see. We've got a lot of races to cover. But if we were to see a change in leadership in the House, and policy changes, regulation rollback reverses, tax cuts reverse. Talk to about the impact of the economy on end business.
First of all, if they get control, God forbid if they get control of the House, nothing will happen. They'll have investigations. They'll try to investigate Kavanaugh. Even though they looked horrible, I think and obviously I'm biased, but what they did to that man and his family is disgusting.
And now we found out 2 women lied. They admitted, I made it up.
And
what? And you're not hearing that story in any mainstream media.
And remember this, Martha Stewart went to jail for lying to a federal agent. She was not under oath. These people testified under oath to the Congress.
If you don't mind, I'd like to shift back to the phenomenon what's happening here, because now we have the futures up 120 points. And I'm wondering, this is a surprise to the markets. This is something they didn't count on. They almost factored in the House going one way, the Senate another way. But this could be another 2016 phenomenon here, where the media, the prognosticators, the intelligentsia, whatever, they're all wrong.
Bernie wrote a fabulous piece today. Yeah. Did you see it?
Yep.
Magnificent piece. Like it or not, might we wish that Trump had a different personality? Might we wish that he did things differently? Guess what?
Yeah.
I tell people,
Ken.
do I want a doctor, a brain surgeon that's got great bedside manners but heavy hands, or do I want a brain surgeon who's got terrible bedside manners, but he's got the most skillful hands in the world when he's opening my head up? I know what I want. I liken Trump to the guy that knows how to. First of all, I think his instincts are fabulous.
His instincts or his intelligence?
No. His instincts. For example, what he's done here in the last few months with these rallies. I know you may have. I don't know if you have a problem with them or not. All I know is one thing.
I don't have a problem at all. I can't find a thing that he's done that's been wrong.
That's my point.
What I don't understand is people who want to call it instinct when it's an obvious intelligence. I don't understand people who talk about what the president understands when he's the only one, it seems, on various days in the swamp who actually knows what he's doing and knows that the American people expect sweat and energy and passion when you hold the office of
You're
president.
right. Now, let me tell you what.
You also expect the president of the United States to put the United States first.
Right.
Why that's
By the
a
way,
question.
name the last president who did
I never
that.
got that one.
We elected him president, not these other foreign countries. We pay his salary. He takes nothing, thank God. Let me say this to you, Lou. The thing that I found remarkable about 16 was how all these professional politicians missed the message. Trump is the fever. The disease is the anger and disgust and disappointment of the American people with their elected leaders. Trump offered these people, that's how he won, the possibility that things might change, they could change, and they would change.
Think about this, Ken. This president, as candidate and as the chief executive of the country,
Right.
is the person who has set the agenda from the moment in June of 2015
Exactly.
that he decided to run for president. No one else. His ideas are the only original idea.
Right.
And I, by the way, tested on it. You know, the fact of the matter is, his were the only original ideas on every major issue. He was first.
So let me add to the instincts part, because I hear you on intelligence, but
He is
instincts matter
intelligent,
too.
by the way.
But one of the things that he said to me is that, you know, he came in, and I'll give you China as an example with trade, and he said that, you know, this just didn't make any sense to me. You lay it out on paper, it doesn't make any sense. He was willing to go where other politicians didn't dare go. Maybe that's instinct, or maybe it's conviction. He's saying,
How about courage
look,
and principle?
Yeah,
Well, do you
and I think he
had
has
he
that.
not campaigned for these candidates, he campaigned for the ones who are doing well tonight, that they would have won or be on the verge of winning, what appears to be
No,
the case?
I don't think. I mean, one of my questions has been throughout, can his charisma and personality and strength transfer to these other candidates? I think as we watch this unfold, I'm seeing the answer right before us, because if he hadn't hit the campaign trail with this kind of enthusiasm in this kind of way, it might have in fact been a blue wave. Who knows?
Oh,
I
no,
mean,
he
it's-
definitely worked
Guys,
incredibly
I don't
hard.
want to interrupt here, but in Mississippi, we're told you have to have a 50% of to avoid a runoff here, and we're not at that point here, so obviously there will be a runoff here. What do we know when that's slated? I think it's
a month away.
Yeah, I think it's 6 weeks away here. But that will be the case there. But again, we're looking at a situation now in the House where Democrats are running ahead of Republicans, but again, not en route at this point to picking up the additional 23 seats they would need to get to 218, the majority that you would have in the House. What do you think of that?
Well, I'd like to talk about trade for a minute and Trump and China. Away from your question, I'm not ducking it. I don't duck questions. You know that.
Yeah, sure.
I get in
please,
trouble
go
by
ahead.
answering.
Yeah, fine.
Why is it? Why is it that he precipitated the confrontation with China about trade? They didn't. Why? Because they had a great deal.
Yeah.
And every
Imagine.
year
$500
they
billion,
kept
that's
saying,
why.
let's talk about it next 30 years this is going on. Finally, one day he says, guys, next year is here. We're going to talk and we're going to start doing things. Now, we have to figure a way out to give China a graceful way to come towards what we need to do. But God bless the guy. He stopped the damn thing from being kicked down the can again.
And there was a story last week that as part of a potential new trade deal with China, China will buy oil from the United States versus Iran, which would be so big as part of the beginning of a trade deal. But I think what we should also focus on, Neil, is what's going to happen after these midterm elections. We're probably going to see a shakeup in the administration.
Right.
There are going to be a lot of
we go, right?
departures. And I think once the president announces that Jeff Sessions is leaving, his attorney general,
Right,
which is, I mean, I'm expecting it tonight or tomorrow. He's going to get a new AG, and if he does have this majority, if the Republicans have this majority in the Senate, that's an enormous victory for the president, because he's going to be able to get all his confirmations through, Neil. With a new attorney general, he's going to, number one, he's going to go, Robert Mueller, let's see what you've got. I want it now. Open it up.
Well, that's the next thing. We're told it could be just a few weeks away.
Yeah.
The Mueller report.
Well, by the way,
New AG
I
changes
think
everything
Mueller's
for President
looking
Trump.
some way to gracefully say, look what I found. He's found. Understand something. In Washington, there's no secrets. If he had something, everybody would know it right
Absolutely.
now.
Of course. It would have been leaked a year ago, Ken.
Absolutely. Tell you one more thing. Old man Bush, Clinton, George Bush, Obama, Trump, all five of them had one thing in common. One thing. Every one of them promised they'd move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So when they did it in the campaign, they must have thought it was the right thing to do. Why didn't they do it? He did it. I made this promise. This is a small thing, but to me, it's a representation of the guy saying, hey, I promised you I'm going to do this. Maybe it's not the right thing, but I made a promise and I'm going to keep it.
Another interesting test is to think about those presidents that you just mentioned and ask yourself which of them in their terms in office, entire terms, whether 4 or 8 years, accomplished anything approaching what this president has
2 years?
achieved in 2 years.
In
well,
2 years.
21 months.
All right, even less, right.
It's funny to see President Obama come out and say, I started it. You didn't build that. This president built that.
Well, you know, he may be trying to protect his legacy in some ways,
Yes,
but the reality is
Protect
we
his
had 8
legacy.
years. 8 years of no, I mean, what is it? 1.5% annualized growth, but it was basically no growth.
Let's attempt to some fair balance here with the
Fair
prior
balance?
president. The
Truth is
improvement
not about
began
fair
then.
balance.
Under Obama, 100%.